I'm really glad to see Josh and Sable here for the Be Better Club. It's our second session of the fall, and we're doing agriculture and environmental themed discussions. And this one, I was most excited about, I have to say, about de-extinction, because the company Colossal Biosciences has made the news for de-extincting the dire wolf. And we shared a podcast link for this session that was an interview with some of the folks sort of around that, science writers thinking about that. Uh, and then our Ethically Speaking series in the Center for Ethics is going to host the bioethicist who is advising Colossal. She's a University of Michigan bioethicist. She works on, as a bioethicist, human genetic issues, but she's got a lot to say. Well, she's got a lot she can't say about her work with Colossal, but she'll be here speaking with us later. This is our chance, though, to think about the ethical issues around de-extinction. And I don't know, did you both have a chance to listen to the little podcast thingy?
Listened to it on my drive over this morning.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
And what did you think?
I thought it was pretty interesting. I especially was interested in near the end when she was talking about the species that she thinks that it might be okay to bring back, like the Tasmanian tiger, which went extinct recently due to human causes and has had an impact on the ecosystem by its loss.
Yeah. This makes sense. And she's juxtaposing that against species she thinks maybe it's not okay to bring back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like species that have been extinct for so long that we don't really know how they would interact with the environment now, and we don't know how they would behave or something. Like the dire wolf, the scientists claim that it would behave like dire wolves, but since it's not being raised by a dire wolf pack, we can't really know how it should be behaving.
Yeah, that's well said. And I think the other thing that caught my attention about this topic in particular is that, let's loosely call it the nature-nurture distinction. Um, I don't think I realized until this podcast that Colossal had changed only 20 genes, um, between the gray wolf and the dire wolf, to try to bring out a subset of traits that they thought a dire wolf would have. So this wasn't a whole genome with millions of differences, but just a very small selection of things for a white coat and a bigger size. And I don't know what the other traits were intentionally, but
I think they said they didn't even do all 20 because some of the genes would cause blindness and deafness and gray wolves.
got it.
Some of the genes they would have to modify for the dire wolf.
Yeah, so that's why they described this thing they made as dire wolfish, um, which I think is really interesting. And I don't know what to do with the company. So we can talk about the technology, we can talk about the organism, we can talk about the context and the science behind it, wherever you guys want to go.
Stable, I'm happy to have you lead. There's a number of things I found interesting, but I feel like a relative novice here, even though I have the philosophy background. So wherever you might be most interested, we should start there.
Okay. Well, I found all of it pretty interesting. I guess the part that I found the most interesting though is basically the debate on the species that we could bring back that have gone extinct more recently. Should we bring them back? And also, is that going to decrease public support for protecting endangered species? Because then people will be just like, oh, well, if they die out, we can just use technology to bring them back. I thought that was a pretty interesting point because I can see that being a real thing where people might just write off what endangered species and be like, oh well, a scientist can just bring them back.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think there's some tensions between the let's call it the ethical position around conservation and the epistemic question around what we're bringing back. Because if we let I don't know, we were talking about mosquitoes, Sable, in class. So let's say we let a mosquito go extinct, and then we're like, oh no, that has some unforeseen ecological consequences that maybe because they're so recently extinct, we've got enough of a genome to actually bring it back. but that's not how it works, right? Even if you have a full genome, it's not like you can just create another one of these things, because it has to be bred and grown and whatever. So there was a moment in the podcast, if I remember, about the artificial womb technology. And I think the podcaster was like, said something like, can't we just, I think it was in a crazy hypothetical example, like breed an army of super soldiers or something in artificial wombs. And the science commentator was like, yeah, well, no, like we don't have those technologies. We still need a host organism to breed these things. And then you're right back into the nature nurture debate. So the thing you're bringing back isn't quite the thing that went extinct. And I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, with some animals, especially like the other one they were talking about is woolly mammoths. How, like, if we brought a woolly mammoth back from an Asian elephant, which of course wouldn't be exactly a woolly mammoth, but she was talking about how, like, elephants are some of the most, like, intelligent animals, and they have, like, complex social needs compared to, like, some other animals. And, like, if we brought back a woolly mammoth, but we didn't know, like, what it needed, would it be ethical to bring this one or a few individuals back, but then have them separated from like the herd that they really need?
Right. Yeah, that's interesting to think about that in terms of the animal intelligence, because the early debates about de-extinction were around organisms like the passenger pigeon were more on the like species ecology side. So it wasn't about how the individual might feel or perceive. It was about there wouldn't be the ecology that made the passenger pigeon what it was, right? Billions of birds who could survive but nesting on the ground because there were just so many of them, right? Who were dependent on these groves of trees that don't even exist across North America anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ecological conditions are just different. And I didn't. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I found this discussion at the end about which species it would be moral, like in the sort of bring back. And I also found the mammoth thing quite interesting because I hadn't really considered it, even though I should from like an environmental perspective, the intelligence levels and how that would change things, right? So when I do think of at least, African elephants, right, they apparently like visit graves and things like that. And so it does feel like, okay, that feels a little bit like, bringing me back into existence when everybody I know is gone and there's no like social connection. And so that was a moral cost that I hadn't considered until I heard it. But then it made me balloon up like, okay, so maybe it's highest as a moral cost in maybe the woolly mammoths. But I imagine in other mammals, that's a similar sort of, these social animals, especially like there's something going on there. So period that, and then maybe we later can get this. The nature versus nurture discussion is happening again here because it feels like the nurture gives evidence the moral importance of this is like, well, what sort of social environment are these individuals living in? Is that so? That's like another moral consideration that it feels like in some sense really hard to imagine overcoming until I see like the costs or the environmental benefits, maybe like bringing back the Tasmanian tiger or something. So I thought that was a lens that was really interesting. I didn't think of it until I listened to the podcast, and then it raised all these moral dilemmas.
Yeah.
That's the same thing I was thinking about, was if how for a mammoth to be brought back now, it would feel like if I had been like brought back as a human when there's no other humans left. I don't know if like you could have a mammoth like live with Asian elephants and if it would get the socialization it needs, although in that case, what would even be the point of bringing mammoths back?
Yeah, I want to just be careful about pointing out a potential fallacy here, right? The thing that we're bringing back would not be you or like one particular dire wolf or one particular woolly mammoth. It would be a representation of the species, right? So the thing that we're bringing back, like, Sable or Josh, you would be brought back. Your genetic sequence would be brought back, but you wouldn't be you because you wouldn't have your relations and your ecological condition.
Right.
Some like bizarre new
Yeah,
organ,
that's a good point.
like an invasive species or something, right?
I think like if I had been born into a future where there were no other humans, that's
Right.
what I was thinking when I was
Yeah.
thinking about like a mammoth is born into a world where there's no other mammoths.
Yeah. So
But
its intelligence would be then if its intelligence is inherent, somehow genetically linked, which maybe is an open question, its intelligence would be applied to new things, not necessarily
that's
intra-species relationships, which is interesting.
right. That was a great. Yeah, that's definitely a fallacy I was falling into because you're right. It wouldn't be missing or lacking in some sense mammoth culture. It would have presumably African. It would be a really hot and hairy. I'm not African. Asian elephant. That sounds like.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so maybe there wouldn't be as much of a harm there as the one I was conceiving of plucking out of a.
But this did make me think about like old stories in new ways. So I was thinking about Jurassic Park, and there's that famous scene when Ellie and Grant are driving the car thing, and they see the big herbivores in the distance, and the music plays and all this stuff, right? And they're like, "Wow, it's amazing." Before all that, there was one big herbivore that was like bred or created or something and released onto this plane all alone with no friends around it, right? And that had to have been really strange. And it's only apparently over time that the world of Jurassic Park built up this ecology that somehow fit or whatever, prey and predator relationships and fauna and flora and all of those things. But even then, like, yeah, even then there's all those questions about, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
If what woolly mammoths ate, like, do we still even have the like food that they would eat today? Do we have the plants that they would eat? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the short answer would be no, probably not, right? There might be some species that survived tens of thousands of years, but they would end up eating other stuff, which would change their, let's say, gut microbes, which would change them in turn. And so you'd end up with some very different organism that had some genetic similarities with a woolly mammoth or a direwolf. And I think that's really interesting because what they've done is what Colossal has done is bred really big gray wolves with a couple of different traits. And that's interesting, I guess, but it seems like a little bit of a misstatement to say that they brought back direwolves.
Yeah, definitely. All the articles that had that as the headline were definitely misrepresenting it for people who were just going to see that and not dig very deeply into it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so
Now, have
maybe
responsibility um to announce their findings as what it really is, not as bringing back dire wolves, but as breeding a gray wolf with some dire wolf traits. But that's not going to make headlines and get them maybe the fame and recognition they're looking for.
yeah. So that's where I wanted to shift gears just a little bit away from the species towards the company. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, the company is super interesting because I think I can't remember who it was now. Um, I think it was Ben Lamb, but somebody at the beginning of the podcast was quoted as saying that like they worked on this direwolf project because predators are so important. And I wrote down in my little notes here, it's probably not the real reason, right? So this
Yeah.
is led by a late career, very rich Harvard geneticist, George Church, and what they would describe as a tech bro, Ben Lamb, whose job it is to make companies profitable. So I hear you, Sable, that like they're selling an idea of de-extincting this wolf when really they're doing some genetic manipulations that the idea for which has been around for quite some time.
This
Yeah, I
is
thought.
sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was going to say something that I was thinking about slightly off topic from the company, but if we did get to a point where we could bring back extinct species, do you think that we would have like more of an obligation to bring back species that went extinct because of humans?
I think that's for me one of the most interesting ethical questions, Sable. Like, because we have the technology now, does that come with the obligation? Right. So let's set all the technical questions aside and say, yeah, we can bring back the dire wolf. Does that mean since we can do it, we have the obligation to bring back all these other species that we have made extinct? I don't know what to say there. I mean, part of it is the debate we've had in class and we'll have again about conservation versus preservation. Like, what's the historic moment you're trying to conserve or preserve, and why that moment among others? What's the role of human beings and their technologies and manipulating the natural world? And can we do it in ways that aren't just to our benefit, but are ecological? My favorite example of this is, and I always get them confused. I can't remember if it's Yellowstone or Yosemite, but where wolves have been reintroduced because we've killed them off. They've been reintroduced, and because of their reintroduction, the whole ecology of the park has changed. And that story I just find fascinating, right? That you brought back a keystone species, a top predator, and that led to herbivores not spending as much time near the water because it's a good place for predation. And that's led to grasses growing up around the rivers that they didn't have before, which led to less erosion, which led to beavers coming back, which led to plants growing in the river and along the river that weren't there before, which led to insect life. It had this, what they described as the tropic cascade happen from the top all the way down to the bottom. And I could imagine readily that if there were a, I don't know, pack of dire wolves released into Yosemite, that would completely reshape the ecology yet again.
Mhm.
That was actually the argument in the podcast, I think, for why she thought we could bring back Tasmanian tigers, was because they were like a top predator and now there's nothing filling that niche.
Yeah. I mean, with all the caveats, like you could bring back wolves with some constraints, bring back wolves in the national parks because they're big and can support wolves. But
Yeah.
until those wolves leave and start conflicting with farmers, ranchers, which they've done, then you're back into the, do we keep them around? Do we kill them off again? Debates. So yeah, the ecology is not just like out in the world, but it's us and our technologies and our farming infrastructures and all of that. I don't know what to do.
See,
Yeah.
also, because I'm just not very sympathetic to species as such having value. The question of like, okay, do we have some special obligation to bring back species maybe that we caused to go extinct? It makes you think, okay, well, what's like the harm we're rectifying, number one. So I have some questions about that, but also like who's like the recipient of this? And it feels to me both those questions are distant, but like this recipient, it seems like the species that we're bringing back, it doesn't feel to me like responding to a particular harm for the individuals who went extinct.
Yeah.
But this is partly because, right, I'm not giving such status to species. So it's interesting, like if I did give an individual species to some important moral status independent of all those members, right? Then I can say, okay, well, maybe I'm like doing good by Tasmanian tiger by bringing those individuals back. But for me, my first pass answers is like, no, of course there'd be no special obligation to bring back species we led to go extinct for that reason. It would be because, okay, Tasmanian tigers are really important to its ecology and we need it for these reasons, or bringing them back would have these tropic cascades? Is that the word we use? So
Yeah.
these changes that go up and down the pyramid.
Yeah. Yeah, so if I'm hearing you right, Josh, it's you're articulating a view where like you might not have moral obligations to species, which I'm sympathetic to that view. And you might have them, you probably do have them to individuals. So by de-extincting a species, you're not doing anything for any individuals you've harmed. You're just
Right.
creating new individuals that could potentially be harmed.
And for me, because I put the status on those individuals so much, it makes it really hard to de-extinction problem seems so serious because like, okay, what kind of environments are they going to be in? Are they going to be environments where they can flourish? Are the foods, so that's like a higher cost. But I think if I did give more status to species in some way, or I thought species diversity as such was like an end, the scales would be easier. It'd be easier to justify de-extinction, right? I think if I gave, more weight there. But it's just interesting. I'm not saying it's right, but
That is super interesting. I had this like little mini horror thing happening in my head when they were talking about adapting part of the Arctic or Antarctic to like a park for dire wolves and woolly mammoths and whatever. And thinking like, let's say we did that, but then ice caps continue to melt and eventually quite soon there will be no climate for which they are adapted. And then you've ended up with new individuals who you can harm by climate change in ways that we didn't anticipate. Yeah, it struck me that might be a reason against trying to bring species back.
maybe we need to go back further to the species that thrived in like the much hotter, more humid Earth, right? So isn't it like
Yeah, nice.
200 million years ago, whatever?
Yeah.
Jurassic Park was onto something, I guess.
That's right. The more species that can prey on people, and then you'd be also off and running. Yeah. Sable,
I
I'd like
think
to.
if there's
Go ahead.
an obligation, like I think that if there was a moral obligation to bring back the Tasmanian tiger, for example, I feel like that obligation wouldn't really be towards the species itself, but more towards the ecosystem and the other species that are still alive.
With the idea that bringing back a top predator like the tiger would help everything underneath it in the phylogenetic.
Yeah. Like
Yeah,
how the reintroduction of wolves to the national parks helped the ecosystem in the parks. I feel like it would be out if there was a moral obligation to bring back these species, it would be to rectify the harm that we have done to the ecosystems as a whole.
yeah. I think I like the, let's call it the pragmatic position that the podcast ended in. Like if a species has recently gone extinct, like the Tasmanian tiger, maybe, and the passenger pigeon, and you thought they played a role in an ecosystem that would support ecosystems in general, then that would be a reason to bring them back. But if you didn't have ecological conditions in place, that's a reason against bringing a species back. And again,
Yeah.
that's leaving aside all the questions about what it means to bring a species back.
Yeah, definitely. Like if we brought them back today, then would they even be able to fulfill that role of a Tasmanian tiger with our technology that we have?
Yeah, yeah. I when I first thought about this several years ago, the few little pieces that I wrote on this topic were about the passenger pigeon in particular, because it struck me that the history of the passenger pigeon, sort of, let's say, post railroads in the US West, was a horror story, right? It was
Yeah,
just people, functionally hunters, poisoning thousands of pigeons at a time out of trees, putting them in barrels, putting them on trains, and shipping them to major cities as a food source. We brought those pigeons to extinction in just a matter
yeah.
of a couple of decades. And
The
so,
fact from being the most abundant bird on planet Earth to complete extinction in such a short period of time, um, I feel like is a really strong lesson about what human-caused impacts on the environment can really look like so quickly.
yeah, yeah. And for me, it's struck me as a pretty strong argument against this de-extinction puzzle, because it's hard for me to imagine we bring a species back just for the good of an ecosystem, right? It feels like it's got to have some instrumental good for us. And anytime we're related to something instrumentally, it doesn't turn well for that thing. It seems to me. So
Yeah, I think I say I'll agree with that last point. I think that this feels like to me a more general problem of like when there's robust power inequality, or even not very robust, but when there's a serious power inequality, right? And so that's why like another cause, it feels like there's a lot of things we shouldn't do, but it feels like here's an instance where we can pump the brakes, right? These de-extinction, it feels like really worrisome because like it's an existence that it's hard for me to imagine actually sorry, it's hard for me to imagine us taking these actions without some other ulterior motives that I'm like concerned about. Like it's hard for me to imagine us consistently doing, other regarding things. Now I think that doesn't mean it's not possible, and so that's why I think it really is an open question. And at the end, I thought, oh, maybe there is a de-extinction that is worthwhile. That I wasn't expecting when I started the episode. I was starting to think this is sort of sci-fi thing that's silly. There's not really good justifications for it, even if it was and then I'm like, oh, maybe we need to bring back the Tasmanian tiger. That might maybe fit that niche well and resolve some of these problems that the Australian ecosystem is dealing with. Um,
yeah.
yeah. So that was long-winded.
I really can't. I feel like for me, just so totally personally, I feel like my moral priority is on the welfare of individuals. And it's, again, hard for me to imagine a world, say, of Tasmanian tigers where scientists were excited to have them around for ecological reasons, and a whole bunch of other people were excited to have them around because they could be hunted as trophies or something, right? Like it feels like there's inevitably quite a lot of individual suffering that goes on in ecosystems, especially when humans are involved. And to bring a species back to open it up to that possibility seems morally inappropriate to me, almost.
It
But
does seem like another one of those devil's sort of bargains that we have to make where like a lot of ecological funding, right? And okay, how true this is. An argument for like, the big game hunts in Africa, right? Is this is where there's a lot of money going in to protect these wild species, right?
Right.
And it feels like another instance where like the motivation of my allies in this particular issue seems really distasteful and objectionable to me, right? Like, so the idea that like, I want direwolves because they were mentioned in Game of Thrones or something. That's not as bad as hunting. It's really not. But like, it's like
Yeah.
something like, okay, so we're trying to somehow game it so these poor motives or poor intentions can be used for good ends. Um, I guess sometimes that works, but like, I guess that's a risk too. And yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, that's super interesting, Josh, to think about. Let's call it like the safari mentality, because there was a,
Mhm.
a worry in the podcast, and I can't remember by whom now, about what the profit end of this company is going to be, right? Sure, they've had the
Mhm.
success and visibility, but what's the point? I mean, maybe it's like the safari model where they're like, you can come Jurassic Park style and see these animals, but for a premium, you can come and hunt these animals. And yeah, that's going to support the park, but like the trade-offs.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
other,
maybe that's how they can get. I'm sure a lot of people would be interested in the woolly mammoth for that reason.
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, the tiger, the woolly mammoth, the dire wolf, any of these like big, interesting looking species. Yeah. The other thing that was interesting for me to think about is the speed of technological change. They mentioned, so was it 2003? I've kind of lost track of the dates now, but not very long ago, we sequenced the human genome, and then as of 2015, we had applicable uh, entry-level tools for CRISPR gene editing. Then out of the pandemic, we had mRNA vaccines, so we had that technology available to us. And now there's this push to apply AI to genetic sequencing, the same AI platform that was used to that used synthetic data to learn how to play chess and Go was used to um, solve a protein folding problem that was like 50 or 60
Oh
years
yeah,
old.
I saw that, and that was like, yeah,
Yeah, so there are all these technologies that are making things like de-extinction easier, I guess we'd say it at the entry level. And so it feels a little bit like there's an inevitability, like we've got the technology, so it's not a question of can we do it or should we do it, it's when we're going to do it.
hmm
So even the Jurassic Park, should we do the thing even if we can do the thing, um, feels almost like a silly question because of course we're going to do the thing. And almost every technology we've developed, we've gone ahead and done it eventually. That's true with
yeah,
stem cell research, which not more than 20 years ago was a huge moral conundrum in the West. We're slowly moving ahead with that, better understanding it, getting over cultural hangups and all of those things. So I wonder if the conversations we're having now, the ethical questions about de-extinction, will continue to, let's say, resolve themselves. As more and more of these instances happen, and we're like, oh, it's not so bad, or yeah, the technology
yeah,
is, I think, an interesting angle.
yeah. I think I don't know if I was reading the pessimism into that, but like it feels like putting the brakes on it, slowing it, that feels like can be a win, even if ultimately it'll happen. And I feel like there's also a way in which like some of these things might, I can imagine these things being ruled out in some places. And so yeah, maybe there will be, you can go to some country and do a canned hunt of the woolly mammoth, but that might be of some sense better than being able to go anywhere and do it or something. So I feel like the ethical discussion might still have some value, though I am sympathetic to the idea that like the technological and economic interests are just going to trug along, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's well said. Like I don't want to let us discount the moral issues, even if there's some economically motivated inevitability. Like there's still going to be important ethical questions. Yeah.
And I suppose a additional benefit might be there's presumably going to be some the captive breeding stuff that we're doing now and all that. I imagine artificial wombs for many animals is going to be a thing that's going to happen. Presumably, that's also going to help with these problems of captive breeding and so forth. That like there might be trade-offs for real conservation purposes too, where like or not trade-off benefits, maybe unintended or knock-on benefits, right? Like that, like it's going to be more easy to like actually reintroduce some species that we're trying to get to captive breed, which I think is pretty bad for the species who's now in captivity. but also be a benefit of like, now look, more pandas, and these pandas don't have to live in these conditions that they're not going to enjoy. So there might be benefits that the folks making dire wolves are going to fund essentially for the conservation movement.
Makes sense.
You
Yeah.
know, I just read recently, unfortunately, the article had minimal details, but it was about a robot with an artificial womb that they are working on in China. So they're already working on that technology now.
I can't say that I'm surprised. I haven't seen that yet, but I do think that like the idea of the artificial womb has been around, and it's again, it feels a little inevitable that no matter what moral conundrums you might have, the idea that this is a thing we could do is probably means it's a thing we're going to do.
I agree. I think that though there are moral questions about a lot of these things, I think that people know in these companies think like, well, if we don't do it, someone else is going to do it first, so we need to do it now, disregarding any other ethical concerns or whatever, just because otherwise we're going to lose the chance to be the first to do it.
Yeah. You know, Sable, now you've got me thinking. Like, I can't tell if I'm intrigued to know if this example of the robot with an artificial womb is more like the Matrix pod or more like Boston Robotics with a womb. Either one is disturbing for its own reasons, but I could imagine all sorts of strategies for raising organisms in external wombs of all kinds.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So Sable, if there's like one ethical issue that you had to like hang on to, or that bothered you most or excited you most about de-extinction, what would it be?
I think no, it's always so hard to just pick one of anything, but I guess just an idea of that people might rush to do things without making sure that the welfare of the animals being brought back and the welfare of the ecosystem will be good. Like bringing back mammoths, for example, I feel like someone might rush to do that without seeing, is there a place where we can support mammoths? Will the mammoths themselves be able to live there? Will there be conflict between humans and mammoths? I think that's the biggest issue probably, is if people rush to bring back these animals without first seeing if there is any way they can currently be supported and will have decent standards of life.
Yep. That seems like an important one to me. It makes me think of it sounds precautionary to me, like the precautionary principle. We have to be, before we push a thing forward, we ought to be aware of its ethical implications. Yeah, that seems like an important one. Yeah, good. Josh, would you say for you it's the species versus individual question, or is there something else that stands out?
Yeah, I suppose it's I think it's that one. But I think you've given me some pause to think about how serious of a question it is. Because I think normally, I mean, my default answer would have been social circumstance culture, like those things can change, and like I'm not as actually cautious about losing those. And so I'm thinking, okay, yeah, maybe it's a really misapplication to be as concerned about as I am. So my deep concern is still the individuals, but like the particular concern or how I was applying that was like the social stuff. And now I'm a little less worried about it, to be honest, because
Okay.
they'll have some other social environment.
Yeah, I'm really interested to track this case, especially with the wolves, who the podcast said in this like completely opaque way are in some undisclosed location. So these organisms are alive and being raised somewhere. To what end, I have no idea. But I'm really intrigued to know sort of what's next for those individuals, but also for the company. So yeah, as I said, one of the bioethicists involved in this project will be speaking with our Ethically Speaking series later this fall, so we can share details when that comes up. But I don't think Colossal is going to go anywhere, and even if they do, the people involved are still going to do this work at Harvard or wherever else. So something to track for sure.
Oh, there was one other thing I remembered I was thinking about when I was listening to the podcast earlier, when it mentioned that some of the genes for the dire wolf could cause blindness and deafness in gray wolves. I was wondering, what if there's another gene that could negatively affect a species, but scientists aren't aware of it, so then they like create a bunch of species that suffer from blindness or something because the scientists didn't know that gene would affect that. I don't know enough about genetics to know if that's possible or not, but it was just something I was thinking about. I guess
Mm.
Yeah,
kind of like red pugs so much that now they have breathing issues and stuff.
yeah, pugs are a great example. We've sort of done this thing over and over to species, not through genetics, but through breeding programs. Yeah, I I don't know enough about genetics either, but I guess in a rare moment of optimism for me, maybe this is a space where AI is going to help because genetics and gene expression on the DNA and RNA sides are so complex. Um, and artificial intelligence platforms as they exist now are really good at complexity. So maybe it's the
Mhm.
case that AI platforms can help us better see the potential risks, right? And sort of head off changes that we shouldn't make to an organism. On the
Mhm.
other hand, Sable, I think you brought up in class genetically modifying mosquitoes, which we've done here in Florida, and it's being done across the um, in South America too, to sort of breed out species that carry dengue and other things. So we're already doing a little bit of that genetic modification and then releasing those organisms into the wild to breed down a harmful population. Benefits and risks, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely too soon to know for sure how much the ecosystem will be affected by changes in the mosquito population.
Yeah.
I'm
Here's
really
here's a
conflicted.
case. Oh, go ahead, Sybil.
I was just gonna say I'm really conflicted about that one because mosquitoes are one of the diseases that mosquitoes carry are one of the leading causes of deaths in certain areas of the world. So I feel like that is a good thing, but at the same time we don't really know all the far-reaching effects. So I'm honestly not really sure exactly what I think about the genetically modifying mosquitoes.
Yeah. Yeah, me
This
too.
is the this is a case where I'm pretty. I think we don't know the far-reaching effects, but I think sometimes I have concerns with the precautionary principle for this sort of like this is a really huge payoff. It's one that feels like it's hard to imagine us solving, like the problem of like mosquitoes and the dengue and chikungunya and all the stuff they carry, right? And so like this seems like a if it works, it could have this huge payoff that I don't see like another economic motivation for. Like it feels like the cost to do these things is so much smaller for the payoff. And
Yeah.
given that we're not really doing a lot to solve these problems in other ways, it feels like um, it is interesting though because like it also feels like kind of a testing ground for really robust. I mean, yeah, essentially, are they using CRISPR on these? Is that how they're editing these genes? But they're making changes to their genome and then releasing them. And this, I know this is like a concern that when I think about it for plants, I'm like, oh, okay. And when I think about it for other animals, I'm like, oh, I start to get spooked, right? Because they're going to reproduce and so forth.
Yeah.
Um, so it feels like a testing ground in a way that maybe I'm gonna have to bite my tongue about it later. Um, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels like the benefits are so great right now that I'm like, we have to be trying something.
Yeah.
And
I
and
think that's
human civilizations, yeah. Okay.
I think that was the justification offered, right? The sort of reasons the company gave. Again, this was a bioscience company who developed these mosquitoes
Yeah.
and released them under the pretense, rightly so, I think, of public health. So yeah, I'm not opposed to that either, but I have to admit, like the Jurassic Park thing is rattling around in my brain that, with one little environmental shift, um, if mosquitoes are capable of such a thing, like the idea that they can't breed changes, and then you've released a new species onto the planet, like what happened with genetically modified salmon when they were released, sort of taking over native populations, escaping from fishing nets. I think there's real risk, and whether it matters, whether the trade-off is okay, human health versus this, let's say, small potential ecosystemic risk. I don't know. That's a big question. Yeah, I think for all these reasons, I find this de-extinction story really interesting. I think ecologically, I think from the animal welfare side, from the human health side, just from the what do we do with scientific toys side, all of these make this a really interesting topic. And I know Colossal's not alone. It's just the sort of first out of the gate company to make the biggest splash right away. But I think a lot of that is the same sorts of things that are happening with AI technology companies now will continue to help with happen with genetic companies too. So again, something to track. We're gonna do this in we'll do it our third one of the semester in 2 weeks. We're gonna do this one on Florida manatees. So thinking about agriculture and wildlife through the lens of the Florida manatee. So I hope you'll come back for that one too, and I'll try to do a better job of getting the word out and attracting more folks. But this was so fun, you guys. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate the conversations.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah, thanks for
appreciate it.
showing.
Yeah. All right, both. We'll talk to you next time.
All right.
See ya.
See
Okay.
you next.
Bye-bye.
Bye.